Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another episode of Mighty Men Foundations. We're excited about this one. It's kind of crazy to say, but we're almost at our last episode now. We started this season just, I think, about 5 weeks ago. This is our sixth week, and we're looking at the life of one of my favorite characters in the whole Bible. I've got to say, probably not just mine, but it's Joseph. Looking at the life of Joseph, one of Jacob's sons, and a real kind of central character in the book of Genesis. And yeah, it's a continuation, like we said, of a family story. We looked at Jacob, we looked at his sons, and now we're looking at Joseph. And I think one thing about Joseph's life, which is absolutely amazing, is that from this point on, we're going to start in about chapter 37 of Genesis. And from this point to pretty much the end of the book, at chapter 50, this all goes through the events of Joseph's life, which is, just to put it in context, I mean, that's about as many chapters as are given over to the first 2,000 years of human history, just on Joseph's life. So there's a lot to say in this. I have no idea how we're going to cover it, but it's going to be good. And we're joined by our panel today, including our special guest on the panel tonight, which I'll let him introduce himself. But just got to say, God is in this thing, God is working. We had a couple of guys who last minute weren't able to make it, and Kingsley was just willing to jump in. So we thank you for that, and we'll let you introduce yourself. But we better introduce all of ourselves first. My name's Ashley. I'm always here on the Mighty Men Studies. Absolutely love studying the Bible, studying these characters out, and yeah, really excited about leading today. I'm not alone though. I've also got Clark with me. Clark, who's silent. Oh, we can't hear you, bro.
How can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Sorry, go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, that's Ashley. My name is Clark Collins. Similarly to Ash, love getting in the word, love seeing how it's practical and applicable to everyday life. So yeah, man, I'm just excited to just see how God leads, man, and see where we go with this.
Thanks, Clark.
Okay. Evening, everyone. My name is Kingsley Akresi. As Ashley nice, I'm the special guest for this. So I have my own ministry called Spiritually Enlightened, and as Ashley knows me, I'm someone that jumps at being able to study the word. I don't have a particular favorite character, but if it would be somebody, it would be either Joseph. I'm really interested to see what exactly, and hope it's a blessing to everyone that's going to be part of this study.
Amen. Thanks a lot, Kingsley. Now, yeah, before we get into this, just a kind of reminder of kind of what this whole series is about. One thing that we always say is when we're looking at these characters, it's not just for the sake of going through the motions of a Bible study. Really, this is called Mighty Men Foundations because we are looking at the lives of some of the more kind of complex men in the Bible and seeing what lessons we as men can kind of pull out from that. And so in this season, just kind of recap, we started with looking at the life of Abraham and then his son Isaac, his sons Esau and Jacob, and then Jacob's sons, and then finally Joseph. And we're seeing through this kind of family dynamic a lot of issues coming out, a lot of kind of recap from the last few weeks has been, issues of how you parent your children, having kind of favorites, choosing maybe the human approach, the human response of kind of finding a way to use your ingenuity and cunning to get through situations rather than relying on God. And I think all of these have come up so far. And it's funny because we see in the life of Joseph how he tackles all of these things. And so what we're going to be kind of looking at today is basically 3 topics. And they all start with P, so it's easy to remember. We're going to look at the start of Joseph's life, where he was a pampered child. And then when he goes into prison, becomes a prisoner. And then finally, when he's a prince. And to be honest, the only reason we're keeping it down to those 3 things is you could have said a lot more. You could have had pampered and then going to Potiphar and then prison and then the palace and then prince. But yeah, just because of time, we're gonna touch on those 3 areas. But it's going to be a really open discussion. And as always, we'd love to hear from you. So if you're on YouTube, if you're watching, please feel free to type any comments or questions in the chat. We'll make sure we get to them. But probably more so than most weeks, We also really want to invite you to the after hours study. We're going to be going through our after hours, kind of takes place about 10 minutes after the main study. And it's a place where we don't record the conversation, so you can say anything you like, any questions, any points that are on your mind. But yeah, you're welcome to jump into that Zoom discussion. We'll post the link on there in the chat afterwards. But I think, yeah, without further ado, we're going to get into our actual topic today. So like we said, that first, in fact, before we say that, let me just ask you, I've already kind of laid my cards on the table that this is one of my favorite characters. Kingsley said it might be. Why do you think Joseph is so popular? Why do you think this story resonates with so many people? What do you guys think?
So for me personally, I feel like it resonates with me because when I think of my past experience with God, it's been a case where, quite similar to Joseph, he didn't actually have a proper opportunity to know God for himself. I'm pretty sure you must have heard of all the stories of, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. But what's interesting about the story of Joseph is that it's not until he has an opportunity to know God for himself, that's when he can say, you know what, fair enough, he's the God of all my forefathers, but now I see him working in my life. And I think of it in my life as more in the sense that I understood about it. It wasn't really until baptized that I really understood, not just about, the church and the Bible and the church, but really understood what my foot was with God. I guess for me, that's the reason why the story is so powerful.
Yeah, definitely. I hear that. How about you, Clark?
It's interesting, man. Carl, I think that these are the kind of, the nice stories in the Bible, man. Basically, Drake's got a song back in the day, man. Start off from the bottom, now we're here, innit? And I think that's kind of Joseph's, he was in the mud, then he got to the palace, and now he's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think also when you look at Joseph's life, I think it portrays characteristics that a lot of us want to have. So Joseph wasn't a slouch. Joseph obviously was good looking. The man's wife wanted him, like all these kind of things. You feel me? So you think, yeah, that's what I want to be, man. I don't think there's no glory without the pain, and I think that's when you look at the story, man. It's quite interesting, McCall. Joseph will never be Joseph if he didn't go through. He went through, innit? So, but yeah, man, it's an interesting story.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I think do you know what? You just saying that made me think. It's one of the few really positive stories in the Bible. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of they might come to a good ending, but if you think of someone like Jacob's life, it's a very hard life. There's a lot of struggle in there. And Joseph's life is hard, but you can get to the end and it's rare in real life. And this is why, for me, the Bible is real life. It doesn't feel like a storybook because there's so many tragedies and sad endings like there are in real life. Mm-hmm. But occasionally in real life, you just get this glimpse of something that's really hopeful that actually works out how it's supposed to work out. And I think Joseph staying faithful where most men wouldn't have stayed faithful it's just a reassurance that it is possible. Do you know what I mean? So yeah. But yeah, love to hear your thoughts in the chat. If any of you have any thoughts, if Joseph is your favorite character, let us know. But also why is it that it resonates? But yeah, having said that, let's look at our first kind of topic then. So I said we're gonna break down into those three areas, and the first area that we're gonna have a look at is this idea of Joseph being a pampered child, a spoiled son, if you like. So Clarky, could you read that first text for us? That's going to be in Genesis 37, verse 1 and 2.
No problem. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding a flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father.
All right. So this hit me when I was reading this. I was like, because obviously I started researching, so I started looking, okay, where do we first hear about Joseph? And it's mad. This is the first we really hear about Joseph, apart from his birth. And so in essence, what is the first thing we hear about Joseph?
He's a snitch, bro.
He's a snitch, yeah. And I don't know. This just made me think as well, is that you could see, because Joseph was kind of pampered, and I could see why that would be a problem for Jacob's first wife, Leah's children, because they were the firstborn. And so if it looked like Jacob would have chosen Joseph over them, you could see where that resentment comes from. But it's interesting because the other half brothers, they might have the same resentment. They wouldn't necessarily have the same resentment, but then this is the first we hear of Joseph, is that he's snitching on those sets of brothers. So it's like immediately he kind of alienates the whole family. And it's interesting that that's the first thing we hear about him. But then it goes on. So I'll read on the next text is just later in that same chapter. And this is 37 verse 3 and 4. It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him." I thought, wow. So yeah, I mean, at this point, what do we think of Joseph when he's first introduced?
He's like I guess, just favorited, but in a way that, it's necessary. Like, speaking from experience as a parent, I have 2 kids, but I would never outright say to like my son, my favorite, automatically know my girl, be like, what do you mean? That doesn't work. And just the fact that, at this point in time, many children already, and they're all boys. Boys are naturally quite competitive. So the last thing you want to hear is that, this person's the favorite, but then the very last thing you want to do is basically make them by giving them, the well, I probably even know from my primary school days, like that's the play that everyone knows about. So already he put himself in a bad position. He's a snitch, and then also now his father is basically treating him amongst the rest of his brothers. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ash, man. The reality is, just based on these 4 verses, it's not he's not a friend that I would have person, and that's just me being honest.
Yeah.
Like, the characteristics that he has here, I'm like, bro, man. There's I've got certain friends who, and because we've grown up together and I know them. So if I was gonna rob a bank, I wouldn't bring them because they're outright. They're like Clark. If I get caught, I'm telling the police, and they're being honest. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I can't bring you with me. You feel me? And I feel like Joseph, he's the brother that he's like, guys, man, this one is yeah, man. He's not cool to be around. Plus he's, and obviously through no fault of his own, but plus he's the favorite child of the dad. So it's like a double whammy, man. It's like, listen, man, bro, there's nothing. The Bible says that Jesus had nothing to be, maybe Isaiah said Jesus was ugly in it, basically in it. And I feel like it's a similar thing with Joseph, isn't it? It's like, he's like, yeah, man, there's nothing I would desire. I don't want to be around him, man. Yeah, bro.
Yeah, it's almost like he's got a checklist of things he can do to make himself unpopular. Like, you know how it is when you're in like primary school or secondary school. I remember like certain days where I'd go in and I remember my parents used to have a van, not a car. And they used to drive me to school. I'd be like, just drop me off far away from the gate. I don't need that. And then like they wouldn't buy you the right trainers. And so you're walking in with the right trainers and with the wrong trainers and you're coming in, and it's like everything Joseph can do on the checklist to get himself beaten up by his brothers, he's kind of doing. Just a couple of thoughts from the chat. Sharon Miller said, one reason why do we think Joseph resonates with us? It says his positivity through the tough times and the interaction between him and his brothers. But also on this point of his unpopularity, I guess, his dad could have kept it a secret when he found out he was his favorite. And I think that's the thing. Like, some of the stuff Joseph does, he can control. Some of it he can't. And I think the thing with his dad is the biggest thing, is that I can almost picture him be like, yeah, dad, like, chill, man, because I'm already kind of unpopular. But yeah, his dad definitely, we already talked about a lot, but definitely has a lot of the blame for this. But
let me ask a question, Ash, just based on the point you just said. Why is it then that doing the right thing is unpopular?
This is what I wanted to get to. Why? Like, because let me put it this way: like, what is Joseph at this point in the story at his best, or at his, like, the best way of looking at it, right, is this: that, yes, he's snitching on his brothers, but we've already heard some of the stuff that his brothers were doing.
Mm.
So surely, I mean, it feels weird, but that's kind of the right thing to do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So at his best, my thought is this: he's well intentioned, but he's naive. That's at his best. Like, he just doesn't. He's not savvy to human interaction. He's naive about how bad his brothers actually are.
Mm-hmm.
What is he at his worst? You know, if we were to look at it through the worst lens, and maybe this comes out a bit more when he starts talking about his dreams.
Yeah.
But at his worst, is he kind of reveling in the pampering and the attention? Is he slightly, does it feel like, at least from their point of view, he's like rubbing their noses in it kind of thing?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Simply.
I want to actually, let's look at these verses, just because these verses, I think this is where it comes out. Because obviously his dad favors him. We know that. He's always kind of looking out after his brothers, the bad things they do, he's bringing a bad report. And we know at this point, it says, it doesn't just say they didn't like him, it said they couldn't speak peaceably to him. Like, literally, he annoyed them so much they couldn't say a nice word to him. It wasn't in them, which is kind of deep. Then on top of that, this happens. He gets a couple of dreams and he shares them. So yeah, Kingsley, do you want to read the first verses, verse 5 and 8 of Genesis 37?
It says, now Joseph had a dream and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his word.
Okay. And then straight away, it says that he had another dream. It says, then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, look, I've dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come down to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, you can kind of see the brothers' reaction at this point, right? But the more I kind of read this and I was thinking about this, I was like, did he actually do anything wrong here?
In my opinion, I don't think he's done anything wrong, but I think this view just assess the situation from outside of his scope of view.
Yeah,
he's doing something wrong because, already he understood he's the favorite. Already he's always snitching at them at every single opportunity. And then now he's outright told them that, God has given me a dream. You guys are going to bow down to me. And obviously already, he's the youngest out of all of them. Naturally speaking, like I'm the youngest. If I ever said to my older sibling, I had a dream. You're going to bow down to me and be like, what on earth are you talking about? This is just absurd. This doesn't make no sense. And I think it kind of has parallels to me of the story of David, when he's picked as, the king to take over, because, when he's actually going to give his brothers, the meal that they're supposed to have before they go to Goliath, already saw his brothers just like, what are you doing? Like, what business do you have here? Like, why are you just controlling me? He said, listen, I'm just surveying the issue. I'm not doing anything bad. And it's kind of interesting because, it's not a case where Joseph's done anything wrong. I just feel like it's a case where he's probably picked the wrong time to do what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he did.
Clark, I feel like you're picturing yourself as one of the brothers right now.
Bro, I've been there, man. Once again, it's he's, and I think either you or Kingsley used probably the right word in him being naive, him being slightly ignorant, because the Bible says they couldn't say anything nice towards him. His response to that is, hey guys, man, guess what? You don't like me now, and guess what's gonna happen in the future? And he tells him the dream, you see what I'm saying? So it's like, but once again, he's not doing anything wrong. And so it's hard to find a balance.
And I think this is the thing, you kind of have to remind yourself, because I had to remind myself, I was thinking of, wow, how would the brothers have viewed him doing this? But then you remember, he did actually get those dreams.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'd probably want to beat someone else because we'd probably think God's not talking to you. You probably just made that up to make a point, which is maybe what they think. But God did actually send him these dreams. And we know they attach very real significance to these dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all his life, he's probably heard from his father about his vision that he saw of angels ascending and descending. And so he knows if something's coming from God, it's important and he's willing to share it. But I think that's where the naivety comes in, is that he just shares with everyone. Like, looking back in hindsight, and probably the older Joseph might have gone to his father first and been like, this is what I dreamed or something, and gone to him in private. But I think one thing that he's really kind of, his biggest naivety, I think, is not understanding the character of his brothers at this point.
Yeah.
Not understanding how this is going to make them feel. And I think this is something that he learns definitely into his journey. But I do think there's a side of him that is kind of very pampered and sheltered.
Mm-hmm.
That if it was left like that, if he was left in the house, could have turned into a really bad character over time, because the more that's kind of fostered, you know what I mean? Shakira's got a really good point. She said both Christ and Joseph were unpopular because the way they were challenged who people were. And that straight away makes me think of that verse, you know, the light came into the world and this is the condemnation. The men hated the light because their deeds were evil. And I think that's one thing. Go ahead, Clark.
That is, and I hear that and I agree with that. But then Solomon says this. Solomon said, watch your tongue and keep your mouth shut and you'll stay out of trouble. There's a balance in it. You see what I'm saying?
Nah, 100%. And this is the thing, like, you see this in Jesus. Jesus, everything he did rebuked people.
Mm-hmm.
But there were times where he'd be silent, he'd keep his mouth closed, he wouldn't go to a feast and stuff, because he's like, you know, my aim is to save, not just to convict. I save through conviction as well. But sometimes people need a stern rebuke and sometimes they need silence and grace and mercy. And I think that's the thing. Joseph wasn't there yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it shows growth essentially. Because Joseph, when we speak of Joseph in the Bible, we're speaking of Joseph, the ruler, innit? Joseph, the governor. Whereas Joseph started from somewhere, man. You see what I'm saying? Joseph wasn't always that guy.
Yeah.
He started from somewhere, innit? So it shows the level of growth, innit? With that being said, it's and I know we're going to get to this, but I just think he's been put in a position that is not necessarily his own fault. Yeah. I think that his father has done stuff to excite the jealousy of his brothers.
Yeah.
And now he's just a byproduct or recipient of that. Yeah.
I think most of the blame for this does have to fall on Jacob. There are some things Joseph could have done differently, but ultimately I think they hated him because he was the favorite. And God was made for him. The dreams just reinforced what was already there. Okay, let's carry on with the story. So we get to the point, and we're going to have to fill in the gaps a little bit here, but we get to the point where obviously they hear these dreams, they resent him, and then because they're shepherds, from time to time their father has to send all the men out to find new pasture for the sheep. So he sends them to Shechem. They move from Shechem, because we touched on what happened with Shechem kind of last week, and they're still not popular there. So they moved on to this place called Dothan. And in Dothan, like, Jacob doesn't hear about them anymore. So he sends Joseph to look for them. And it's interesting because I was thinking about the first we heard about Joseph was him coming to snitch on what his brothers were doing. So when they see him coming over the hill, and you can't miss him because, you know, no one else has that kind of coat. Like, they can see him coming a mile off. Well, they're probably thinking, this guy's coming to spy on us again. And it's interesting when you see their reaction. So, Clark, can you read that for us, verse 18 to 24?
Sure. Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it.
Okay, so they throw him into a pit. And I just, again, like we know these stories, but the point of this is really getting into it, like how that must have felt. Like you come to your brothers, you've been traveling, looking for your brothers for days maybe, and you finally see their camp and you're like, okay, I wonder what they've got on for dinner. It's going to be great to see them again. And then straight away, they don't say a word to you. They take you, they rip your coat off you and they throw you into the bottom of the pit. And at this point, you're probably thinking, like, why are they doing this? Maybe it's some kind of prank. Maybe they're really mad. They're going to throw me into a pit and then they're going to get me out, maybe beat me up a bit. But then it gets very, very real because you hear them talking about they're going to kill him. And can you imagine like just the panic because he's the youngest almost apart from Benjamin as well. So all of these guys, they're already killers. They're already, huge grown men and they're wild with jealousy and rage at you and the fear that comes in. And then I suppose at this point, you still think you can reason with them, but then, we talked a little bit last week that they don't want to actually be the one to draw the blood. And so I think as Judah comes up with the suggestion, and Judah says he sees some Midianite traders coming and they sell spices and silks and stuff, but they also sell slaves. And he's like, why don't we sell them to the Ishmaelites and we sell him as a slave? Then we don't have to worry about his blood and we'll say that he's been devoured by an animal. And so this is verse 31 to 35 says, then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of the goats and dipped the tunic into the blood. And they sent the tunic of many colors and they brought it to their father and said, we found this. Do you know whether it's your son's tunic or not? And he recognized it and said, it is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist and mourned for his son many days. And I don't know, let me get your thoughts on that, guys. Like, firstly, I think this thing of what it would have been like for Joseph at this point when he has to confront the fact, firstly, that his brothers hate him in a way that he didn't even realize. Then they're willing to kill him, and then they're willing to sell him into slavery, forever. Like, can you imagine what's that's like? What's your thoughts?
For me, I feel like that must have been like a very traumatic experience, especially when you think of it. Well, I naturally just assume that, it was the custom of that day for, that your father will ever to tell, his sons of the story that he's gone through. Naturally speaking, I can imagine that probably at that time, he's probably reminded of the situation that Jacob was in, where, Jacob decided to, trick his brother Esau and then, end up giving him a run from Esau, to the point that, the next time he sees Esau, he's thinking Esau's coming to kill him. But we know the story. We know that Esau's actually coming to just embrace him in his arms. But then obviously on the flip side of things, he's probably just thinking to himself, you know what? I used to be with my father's house, I used to be with my brothers, I used to be with all these different people. And now I'm being so into a strange land. I don't know what's going to happen to me. And actually speaking, if I was to put if I was to put myself in his shoes, I would feel some form of animosity towards the brothers. But I think to myself, fair enough, I've done some things wrong, but I wouldn't think that what I've done is warranted.
Yeah.
And I think even though, I know the Bible doesn't explicitly talk about the fact that, he probably heard the whole conversation of the fact that it said, oh, let's kill him, or let's slavery. Even the fact that it's come to this point, he must be thinking to himself, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, how am I going to be able to, fend for myself? How am I going to essentially has more questions than answers. And I think that probably at this point, maybe he's thinking to himself, okay, maybe I can rely upon God. It was almost got to a point where God has kind of brought him in a way that he has to be desperate enough to realize that the only person that can actually help him out of this experience is God.
No, definitely, man. I definitely agree with Kingsley. I think it's interesting. Going back to the first bit that you read, Ash, just in regards to Joseph's, I suppose his desire to be wanted or to be accepted by his brothers. I've got younger siblings. I've got a younger brother, and I never forget in my family. So I've got older brother, older sister. They're similar age. Then there's me, and then there's my younger brother. So because of the age gap between me and my older siblings, they would effectively were my surrogate parents when my mum was at home, and vice versa. I was my brother's surrogate parent for a time when obviously they weren't at home. Now, being a surrogate parent at 12 or 13 or 14, man, it's not fun. Going out with your friends. I grew up in the state, go out to play out with your mates and that. Bro, your brother's got to come, man. You know, going football, your brother's got to come, man. So at one point, there was a level of resentment. I don't know, resentment. Because I'm like, bruv, why you was here, man? Do you see? And that transpired, that translated oftentimes in an outburst of anger, in me being quite dismissive towards him. It just being a horrible person, obviously, when you're 12, innit? You see what I'm saying? Just being not a nice person, man. Yeah. But he, at not one point did, I would go nuts on him today. Tomorrow, he would wake up and be like, yo, Clark, where we going today, man?
Yeah.
I'm like, what, bro, man? Like, I just slapped you out yesterday, man. Like, so it portrayed to me his desire. First and foremost, he's got a clean heart. He's young. He just got just clean heart. He just wants to be loved, innit? But also his desire to want to be wanted by those who should essentially love him or accept him. Go on, Ash.
No, I was saying that's so deep, because I think one thing gets me as Joseph's approaching his brothers, this is not in his mind that they hate. And I think your example is perfect. And when we can understand it, like younger siblings, when older siblings treat them bad, they'll still come back. Do you know what I mean?
Every time.
And I just think, for me, I almost think it's the moment they pull him out and they're like, we're selling you to the Ishmaelites. That's when he really realizes, this is it. You guys actually hate me to this point. And just the level of, because what he's looking for is acceptance. That level of, there's no acceptance here.
100%, Ash. And then why that's nuts is because then, on the flip side, when they see Joseph goes to the place where they should have been. They weren't there.
Yeah.
So then someone said, nah, man, them men are around there, man. So then he goes and he sees them. Hey, we did it, fam. And yeah, I don't know if you, man, obviously I'm not, I don't know if you, man, have ever been caught doing something you shouldn't.
No, never.
Okay, cool. Say that. Ash. And then someone could say hello. That's what I say, hello. You start going nuts. Because you already feel guilty. You're like, I shouldn't be here. I've been caught red-handed. Bro, it's going to be a long day, innit, fam? So their reaction towards him is almost an outward appearance of not only the fact that they've been caught red-handed, but they actually don't like this guy as well, man. So they're like, you know what? Because of what you done last time, I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I know what's going to happen. You're going to go to dad and it's going to be curtains again. Not today, man. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And yeah, Dio agrees with you, bro. Says talk the things, Clark. So this is what's weird. Like, we read the story and you get to the end of this verse and it talks about how they sell him. And we don't have time to go into, but I just think the saddest thing for me is Jacob's reaction. Because the brothers do not get how much this is going to kill Jacob. It really, really hurts him. And it says they couldn't comfort him for ages after this. And you get the sense, like, this is the point I almost start feeling sorry for the brothers, because you know when you're guilty and you want to unburden yourself, but they're just like, we can't, because it killed Dad. And so they got to carry this around for the next 15, 17, whatever it is, years of their life. But we'll get back to that. But what interests me is what happens to Joseph next. And just a little overview. He gets sold on this journey of maybe days, maybe weeks. He kind of has a transformation, doesn't he? Because we can say beforehand, you know, at best he's naive, but at worst he's like a pampered, indulgent kind of son. When he gets to Egypt, he's like a changed man. And so something's happened to him in that journey that is actually kind of amazing. And by the time he gets to Egypt, like we said, he knows who God is, and he's like, I'm going to be faithful to God. He's committed. But I want to ask you the question. I'm going to put this out in the chat as well. What do you think it was that caused this almost instant transformation in Joseph on this journey to Egypt? What is it? Where does that come from, that he turns from boy into man? Because there's something there. But what do you guys think it is that that causes this to happen?
I personally think that, well, obviously I'm presuming it because nothing's really said by the Bible, but I think that during your darkest times, that's when you really truly understand who you are as a person. So one experience I can relate on is I remember when I was made redundant, and obviously it just caught me. And usually in those times, you're like, start asking yourself so many different questions. You're thinking to yourself, hey, God, why have you let this happen? You know, you've given me such a great job. You've given me such a good experience. For some reason I find myself there, you know. You start even asking, you know, why is it that I serve you? And then it gets to a point where you think to yourself, okay, you know what? I'm just going to be remembering the good things you've done for me in the past and just use that as a way to kind of push me forward. And not to say that I can relate to this. That's a completely different story. I guess it reminds me of funny enough, I was actually listening to something by Pastor Ron Gillen. He was talking about the fact that the slaves during this time of slavery, they were singing praises and all of these, you know, upbeat things. But I'm thinking to myself, they're in the worst of situations. In fact, they don't even know if they're gonna not just be able to see their family again or if they're ever gonna see freedom. But for some reason, I think as human beings, there's something in us that we just naturally have the capacity to want to worship someone. And it happens especially in our moments of weakness. And I think that was most likely what happened to him. And he thought to himself, you know what? You know, maybe I'm relying upon the dreams that God gave me to know that, you know, I'm going to get to a place. I have to go through a place. I think that's probably the mindset he was trying to adopt. I guess that's the reason he just became this serious.
Oh, thanks, but I think the sound cut a bit at the end, but yeah, definitely. I got what you're saying. I love kind of what you said about like something like getting made redundant or relationship ending or something like there's a lot of these things that can happen to us that we're like, this is unfair or this is not my fault or, you know, what did I do to deserve this? But I think there's something you said is that it does start making you question. And I think that's the thing, like it'd be very, very easy for Joseph at this point when this happens to be like, I don't deserve this. I didn't do anything wrong. You know, I did nothing deserving this, and then just fall into the self-pity trap. But I think the fact that he starts questioning, he might say, I didn't deserve this, but what did I do for it to get to this point of view? I think there's some self-reflection there has to be, you know, if your brothers sell you as a slave, there has to be something in you that's like, how did they get to this? What could I have done differently? Obviously, it's more on them than it's on me. But I think that introspection is definitely a part of it. Go ahead, Clark.
It's like you said, Ashman, it almost comes across, the way the Bible reads, it almost comes across as if the transformation is instant or instantaneous. He leaves, comes, bang, different guy. But and I think we see the same kind of principle all over the Bible, is that sometimes in order to become who you need to become or who you want to become even, there has to be some sort of separation. So we see Jacob and Esau, the Bible says that Jacob came back, they both got many, they both got, you know, they're both rich, they both got loads of flock. They can't dwell here together, so they have to part in it, you see what I'm saying?
Even Abraham, bro, at the start of this, Abraham couldn't be who he was supposed to be back when he was.
100%. So it's really, really interesting because even when in agriculture, when a lot of my grandma's got green fingers and my granddad used to like, you do have a greenhouse and do all that kind of grow cannabis and all that kind of mad stuff in it. So
yeah, no snitching.
Asthma. So, and when they plant, they can't plant plants too close together, simply because they just won't grow as effectively. Did you see what I'm saying? Because this plant is taking this one's water and vice versa. So it's almost as if Joseph had to be separated from his surroundings and be placed in a surrounding that allowed him to develop the characteristics that God needed him to develop, but also to become the person he needs to become. And they say, man, when the rubber hits the road, bro, man, you either sink or swim. Especially because he was this pampered young child, as you said earlier on. So therefore, he's doing nothing. Like, he doesn't have to do anything. You're the youngest. You're the most loved. So therefore, and you've got like 1 million older brothers. So your life is relatively easy. Whereas now you haven't been put into the deep end. You've literally been drowned into the deep end, bro. You see what I'm saying? And now it's just like, bro, just get on with it. So I think his situation kind of forced him to just be different.
Yeah, I love that. I love. Let me read a couple of these points. Maro 1992 said, "I think he had to rely on God at this point because he had no one else to lean on." Facts, yeah. Shakira also said, "Once something major takes place in your life, often the old you goes because you can no longer be that person anymore." So I love that. But I think both of those tie into what you're saying, Clark. I mean, one thing for me that I think is interesting, like throughout these studies, the last two at least, we've brought up a lot of stuff about Jacob and things that Jacob did wrong in his character and his parenting. I think for me, this might be evidence of something that Jacob did very right with Joseph, that to be fair, he should have done with all his children. But what's clear from Joseph is Joseph has obviously grown up all his life hearing the story of Jacob and his father's God, and how his father's God took him when he was a fugitive, when he had nothing, and he kept him and he brought him back with great wealth. And I think up until this point in Joseph's life, it's been his father's God, and he believes in his father's God, but he's never experienced his father's God for himself. And I think this is a point where Joseph's going to have to draw on those stories and be like, listen, my father's God took my father when he literally was a fugitive with nothing but a stone for a pillow, and he brought him back with everything. And so I'm not going to wallow in self-despair. I'm not going to wallow in pity, because my father taught me, this is not what you do, because God's with us. And here's the point, is I now need my father's God to become my God. Because I said in chat, there's no one else. I've got no one else to depend on. But if God's real, if all the stories I've heard all my life are real, this is the point where it's going to happen. And I think what's interesting is the approach Joseph makes from day one in Egypt is a positive approach. And it's got me thinking, like, obviously there's the despair, there's the betrayal. But I think once he prays, once he says in his heart, God, I'm going on this journey with you, there's probably almost that excitement as well. What I mean by that is, Clark, you said it, like up until now, when's he had opportunity to put God to the test? Like, he's got everything he needs. The father will provide everything he needs. If there's any trouble, he's got 12 tough older brothers to look after him. And he's got the good life. There's nothing to put him to the test. And so I don't know about you, I've been through times in my life that should have been the hardest times. But I'm like, actually, I'm excited, God, because now I can see you acting. Because now those things I always teach in Bible study or that I read about, this is why I need you to come through and be God. Because when my life's too comfortable, it's like I don't give you space to be God. And I think that's one reason I can almost see, like, visualize him sitting in that carriage chained up, thinking, okay, God, it's on you now. This is where you've got to become the God of Joseph, not just the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yeah. Wow. we're kind of going.
In order to make that transition, does there always have to be a crisis then?
Let me throw that question out. I love that. But what do you think?
I think it largely depends on the individual, because I think that in the instance of Joseph, I think without any form of crisis, without anything major happening, he wouldn't have had that impetus to actually say, you know what, I want to know God for myself. And I feel like for us, normal Christians, that would be, baptism. As soon as baptism happens, naturally speaking, automatically we're expecting something. Now the serious work is going to be, and I'm going to get all the serious problems here and there and everything. I feel like it depends on the individual. Of course, with Joseph, with him not really being able to actually have an opportunity to foster a relationship with God, there wouldn't have really been a great opportunity for him to do it otherwise. With just general people, it really just depends on the individual. And I think what's so interesting about God is that, he assesses the situations of all different types of individuals, and then he also makes sure that whatever that individual goes through, that they of course can manage. So, like, what's interesting about this is that it kind of has parallels with Jesus, because I know that Jesus' teenagers are not really mentioned. It says that he grew in stature and wisdom, but us it's like, what does that mean? He, Son of God. What does it mean for the Son of God to grow in stature and wisdom? I mean, he knows everything. He is the Word. What is he growing in? And it's interesting because very much like Joseph, after his teenage years, automatically he's become this guy that can do all these different things. And I think, generally speaking, when you're in your teenage years, that's the time where you can really grow and develop vision. The same goes for like Daniel, for example. The principles that I assume that he learned from his parents were kind of used to be able to allow him to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to eat your meat, King Nebuchadnezzar. My friends are not going to bow down to the statue. I'm going to pray 3 times a day, even though you give them this decree. And I feel like, I guess your experience in the past will drive these things, but Joseph didn't really have an experience. But that's just my opinion anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know, kind of just thinking about your question, it sounds obvious to say, well, no, you can have an experience with God without going through a crisis. But thinking about it more, I'm not even sure if I do believe that. Because it's interesting what Jesus says is he doesn't say it in an ambiguous way. He says, if you follow me, you're going to have issues. You're going to have problems. And he doesn't say you might, he says you are. Now, those problems will not look the same to everyone. And some crises, we don't consider a crisis and all like that. Because if we've literally come out of a war zone, there's people, coming out of Ukraine or Afghanistan or something right now that see our problems with losing a job and they're like, oh, boo-hoo, you know what I mean? But trials are different size for different people. And I think the thing is, I mean, when I listen to Jesus, I kind of have to say that if you do follow God faithfully, you don't have to worry about, will I go through a crisis? The crisis will come in some form. And I think it's because the world is opposed to God. So if you're going to follow God, at some point, you're going to run into a roadblock. And I think that doesn't mean we go looking for the trouble. The Bible does say, as far as is possible with you, live at peace with all men. But he does say, like, don't be deceived. If you're going to follow me, you're going to have issues. You are going to have problems, but fear not, I've overcome the world. I know that's how my thought is kind of developing. I know what you think about it.
It was a genuine question. I don't actually have I just want to see what you guys kind of
view. I love to hear thoughts in the chat. Like, do you think you need a crisis in your life to follow God, to reach that next level with God, or is it not? Is it not necessary? While we're thinking on that, let's move on with the story. So obviously he goes down to Egypt. He has this transformational experience, and the first thing we hear is they sell him as a slave and he's bought by Potiphar. This is Genesis 39, verse 1 and 2. And it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And it's going to come up again, but I just want to bring your attention to that phrase, the Lord was with Joseph. You can't read Genesis 37 to 50 without seeing that phrase come up over and over and over again in Joseph's life. And like, if anyone's looking for the secret of Joseph's success, that's it right here, right? But it says he was successful. Let's see what this looks like. Kingsley, could you read that for us, verse 3 to 6?
Yeah, and it says, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate.
Okay. That's crazy, right? Have you ever had that level of trust with someone? To just say, you manage my money. I don't know what I've got. I don't know what's coming in, but I know this meal I've got in front of me. You can handle everything else.
That's some serious responsibility, bro.
It's level of trust. And remember, this guy, not only is he a slave, but he's a foreign slave as well. Like, he's the type of people that is just ingrained in us as prejudiced human beings that we don't trust. But Potiphar's like, you run my house. And not only that, like, how old is he when it comes to Potiphar's house?
Exactly.
He's a 17-year-old, bro. Like, you tell me, a 17-year-old kind of immigrant at the lowest level of society, are you going to turn over everything you had to them? But the thing is, it's the way he works. I think one thing I think about Joseph is this one of the templates for how to work in the workplace. Is for me, Joseph sums up, those New Testament verses that are like, when you're at your work as if you're working for God, not for man. And I feel like I can almost see Joseph being like a sponge, and just eating up this thing, because God put him in a really specific place, right? When he made Potiphar be the one that bought Joseph as a slave, like, if you think about what's unique about Potiphar's house, Potiphar's a royal official. So if Joseph's taking charge of his house, he's not just doing the dishes. He might have been doing that at first, but he does the dishes so well that they're like, oh, now you can mop the floors. Now you can serve at the table. Now you can, and he just gets elevated. But I think as he's in Potiphar's house, what's he learning? He's learning how to be around royal people. He's learning how to be around high up officials. He's learning how management of things works and administration and stuff. So God, like, this is the preparation. But the funny thing is, if Joseph went to our church and we said, it's testimony time, stand up, Joseph, this would be the end of the testimony, wouldn't it? Like, this would be it. We'd be satisfied with this. We'd be like, yeah, I was, I was a favorite son. My brother sold me as a slave. But you'll never believe what happened, church. God is good, church, because they sold me as a slave and they brought me here and worked my way up, and now I'm in charge of the house. Amen, church. That's it. That's testimony done. No more struggles in my life, right?
100%.
And do you think we ever sell ourselves short by trying to cut off our testimony before God's finished with it?
I think, yeah, to a certain extent, yeah, because, like, so for example, like, I'm pretty sure, everyone, when they've got their degree, automatically think to themselves, I want to be a CEO or something. I think probably as soon as they get to just a managerial post, they think to themselves, that's enough for me. I'm managing people. I'm putting my degree into practice. I'm contributing to my society. I've done enough. And I think just in general, as human beings, because we just naturally just want to achieve something great, when we've reached that particular pinnacle, I guess the time where we just think, okay, enough is enough. And sometimes we have to realize that just because it seems like God is moving the pen doesn't necessarily mean that God is finished the story. And it's really interesting because when you think of the fact that when you think of the various different examples in the Bible, like if you look at, for example, David, for example, when you look at David's experience and him actually being anointed as king, what's interesting is, so I was actually putting together a study on David, and what I found interesting is that David was already introduced to Saul, but Saul didn't know who he was, which doesn't really make any sense to me, because how is somebody playing the harp for you, calming you down and everything, you have no idea who he was? But it wasn't until David fought Goliath, ripped his head off, and said, listen, I done what I said I was going to do. That's when Saul asks, who exactly are you? And that's when he says who he is. And the irony of it is that he doesn't realize that's who his successor is. But I think what's beautiful about it is the fact that even in that experience, David obviously doesn't expect to become king. As a result of his attitude in terms of how he's doing different things, that he's able to really flourish in his positions and etc.
Yeah, I like that. It kind of gets me thinking a little bit of like where our expectations are versus where God's expectations are for us. And I'm thinking, when Joseph got the dream, like, he says it as if he doesn't have a clue what the dream's about. But let's be honest, man, it's not the hardest dream to interpret. The sun, the moon, and 11 stars are bowing down to me. Like, in Joseph's head, I don't know, maybe the highest it goes, I think this is in his brother's head, the highest it goes is maybe our dad's going to give him the birthright. I think Amari mentioned in the chat, maybe it's about the birthright. Maybe that's what Joseph thinks, is God's going to elevate me to be number one in this household. Not for a second is he thinking they're literally going to bow down to him as a ruler. Do you know what I mean? But it's like, God, sometimes we don't want to follow God's path because it feels too humble. And we're like, God is trying to exalt us up to a crazy level of influence. But because we think it doesn't look like success straight away, we're going to try and stop the train here when we've got a little bit of success. And I know that it's not like we stop living or anything, but I think our expectations, sometimes we stop here. We're like, this is as high as God's going to bring me. And God's like, I want to get you higher. But I think one thing that is a kind of amazing about this, though, is that it's not like Joseph is looking for the higher position, is he? All he's looking to do is be faithful. The higher position is a side effect of that. Sorry, go ahead, Clark.
Nah, it's interesting because just based on what you're saying, Ash, in regards to God elevating Joseph to an exalted position, the reality is that God could trust Joseph. Joseph was trust, or Joseph was in a position. Joseph was in a position where all he could rely on, or all he had, the only person he had to trust was God, and therefore that makes him now trustworthy. Now God can work with that, but it's like, well, you know what, Joseph, all you got is me. Let's go. Let me show what I can do in your life. And we see a similar kind of principle all over the Bible. Abraham, like everywhere, where God has to, those who are elevated, oftentimes they're in positions where it's just like, God, it's just me and you. And I've got nobody else. I've got nothing else, man. And that's when they become great. So but the reality is this, Ash, man, is that are we willing to be put in that position where, to a certain degree, and this is the reality, to a certain degree, I know that if I lost my job tomorrow, I've got family, bro. I've got a grandma, I've got a mom, I've got a dad, I've got a stepdad. So therefore, I'm never going to be on the streets, quote unquote. You see what I'm saying? Whereas I work with a young person who's from Sudan, sorry. And if he gets kicked out of his property, that's it. He's like, Clark, I've got no mother or father. So that's it. He's on the streets. And I'm like, I look at the difference in where we are, and I'm like, bro, man. And like you said, Ash, earlier, the things that I class as, you know, as mountains or obstacles or, you know, hurdles to get over, he's like, listen, big man, when I was 14, man, the soldiers came to my village, man. Everyone, dead. I'm like, huh? So he's like, bro, man, I'd like, you know, you ain't got, you left your Oyster card at home. Like, I don't care about that stuff, man. That don't mean nothing to me, bro.
Yeah.
Because he's in a position now where all he's got to, he has to, well, obviously, he believes in something, but he has nothing. And I think oftentimes, man, it's those individuals, or it's when God can get us to that place, that's when we will see things go wild. Because now we're at a place where it's like, God, man, all I have is you. Let's go.
I love that. Yeah, thank you, bro. A couple of points from the chat. Really good point from Amari. Says, leaving parental support is crucial to becoming a man. Sometimes people aren't ready for that, the prodigal son. For all of Jacob's failures, how Joseph turned out speaks volumes to his upbringing. And I think that's true. And it's kind of the sad thing. We get the same thing with Eli in the story of Samuel. It's like, you see, these guys could have been amazing fathers, but it's like they only fathered one individual instead of fathering all their children, kind of thing. And Theo says, I believe for us to know God is doing his thing, we need to have crisis, or we may think, for example, there's a chance. So yeah, if there's not that crisis moment, it's not that God doesn't act, but we just don't recognize God acting. Coming back to the story though, so we know he's been put in charge of the house, we know he's prospering. But this is the part you alluded to, Clark, like Joseph's a good looking guy, isn't it? And I think this is the thing, like they notice it. And we're not going to dwell too much on this because the Mighty Women are going to have an amazing study looking at Potiphar's wife in this whole situation. But just to see what happens, I'll read through from verse 6 to 10. It says, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master doesn't know what is with me in the house, and he's committed all that he has into my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept anything back from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So it was, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. And I mean, just a quick word on that. There's, again, we won't go too deep into that, but I think it's crazy. Like sometimes we think this was a momentary thing. This is literally day by day. There were hints. I mean, you don't get more direct than lie with me. And the crazy thing is she was the mistress of the house. So it's like, you kind of have to follow orders as well. And this is the point where it would have been so easy to find an excuse to be like, you got to do what you got to do kind of thing. And I'm guessing she wasn't ugly. You know, she's the chosen wife of this high official. So like, it's something, I'll be honest, as guys, maybe we're used to it being the other way around, where we're pursuing someone, not necessarily being pursued like that. But it's crazy that I love the way he sees it. is he doesn't even say, how can I sin against my master? That's kind of implied. But firstly, it's like, no, because the person I'm living for now is God. And whatever I do, God's going to see, God's going to judge it. And so I love that. But just moving on to what happens after that, is we kind of know the story is one day, like, he avoids her as much as he can, but he knows there's, like, at some point she's just going to corner him, and she does one day, and she grabs hold of his tunic, his cloak, and it says that he literally ran out of the room. So, you know, he could have very easily, he was stronger than her, he could have just taken it, but he was like, I'm not even gonna stay for more than a millisecond longer than I need to. Let me just run away from this thing. And it said, so she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant who you brought to us came into me to mock me. So it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. Yeah. So a lot there. What do you think of how Joseph handled the situation?
I mean, in my opinion, I don't think he could have handled the situation any better, but it's just a matter of him just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I mean, if he may have not even been in the wrong place at the wrong time, he may have just been doing whatever his duty was. But, you know, obviously he is working for the wife of, he's working for Potiphar, so naturally speaking, he's going to obviously come in contact with Potiphar's wife. I think also interesting about the story is the fact that, like you said, he doesn't say, you know, how can I do this great thing against you? How can I do this great thing against Potiphar? How can I do great things against God? And automatically for me, I think that's probably one of the most defining moments in scripture, because it kind of shows where his I guess you could say his standing is in God, and it has strong parallels to Daniel as well, with Daniel saying, you know what, God, like, I believe it's in Daniel 2 where, you know, there's like Daniel 3 where his friends are saying, you know, the God that we serve will be able to deliver us. And even if he doesn't deliver us, then we still won't bow down. And it goes to show the great principles that, you know, when his friends and everyone has. And I think it has quite good connotations with us, because, you know, as young men, you know, as when you're somebody that's, you know, of that age, that's when your hormones are more or less like quite well developed. And naturally speaking, if a woman is to come to you, your natural inclination isn't to be like, hey, you know, I don't want. You're gonna be like, I wonder, I don't know. Let me survey things and see how things will pan out. But the fact that he's just outright saying, no, this is not going to happen, and the fact that, you know, it's not a case where she's come to him once, come to him numerous times. It's like almost as if she's trying to chip away his character, thing. Maybe if I come at this time, it might be better for him, or what have you not. But the fact that he stuck to his principles, but it is obviously unfortunate. He ended up in prison after obviously being before him. Yeah.
And I love kind of the point you make is, like, he's at that age in life where he's, you know, he's probably feeling that attraction. And I think the point of him running away so quickly is probably because he probably was attracted to her, but, you know, the temptation was real, because you don't need to really run away from something you're not really tempted by. I mean, if there's been no actual physical attraction there, he could have just been like, nah. Like, he literally sprints out the room. He's like, I can feel the temptation almost getting a foothold. I'm not going to let that happen. Let me dash out of the room, kind of thing. Any other thoughts on that, Clark?
I think it speaks of Joseph's. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, especially the people who have made it in life in regards to, you know, entrepreneurs and whatnot. And the one consistent theme between all of them is simply this: is they all have discipline and they all have a routine. And a lot of them attribute their success to that. So they do, at this time, they do this, and they do it consistently. And because they do it consistently, it then becomes a habit. Then they become an expert, and so on and so forth. So Ash, let's be honest, man. And I've known Ash for a long time, bro. So I say this with much respect, bro. I've seen your pictures when you first started, man, in comparison to now, bro. And I'm like, wow. Carl, you've been doing it for a minute, bro, for years, over and over. And now you've become an expert in your field, innit? You see what I'm saying? But that's testament to consistency. That's testament to, you know, to discipline, to going home, drawing, all that kind of stuff. So when I look at Joseph, man, I'm like, you know what? He is a boss simply because bro, his discipline or his what's one up for autonomy or his rule over his natural person. He's a G. He's a boss. The Bible said this, man. In Proverbs, it says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and are safe." And Ashley made the point. This is what strength looks like. Because if you don't run, you are done. Simple, bro. That's it, man. Like, I'm not strong enough to be like, no, fam, that's not me, man. I said it plain. So the reality is this, man, is that Paul says, make no provision for the flesh. If my mum says don't go swimming, and Ash, you call me and say, yo, Ash, Clark, Kingsley, let's go swimming, bro. But I know I'm not allowed, Ash. Then Ash, even if I come to the swimming pool, I'm not bringing any trunks. Because I could want to swim. I could want to be a fish. I've got no swimming trunks, guys, man. So you guys have fun. Simple, man. And I literally think that Joseph, he shows and he portrays just it's a characteristical attribute that I think we're all trying to strive for, man. And that's just where you esteem God's will more so than your own, man. I feel like this, but God said this, so nah, I'm cool.
I love that. And he esteems God's opinion of him more than any man's opinion of him. Like, he knows what the consequences might be. In fact, I think he thinks the consequences are going to be way worse than they are. Because one thing we read about that is she told Potiphar, and what does Potiphar do? He puts him in prison. Now, what does that tell you about Potiphar? For me, it tells me he doesn't even believe his wife. Because if he believed his wife, that some slave that he brought into his house and made famous had betrayed his trust and sexually assaulted his wife, what would Potiphar have done?
He'd be dead.
Without question, Joseph would be dead. And this is what, I think that Joseph knows Potiphar doesn't believe his wife. For one thing, Potiphar knows Joseph's character. And for another, he probably knows his wife's character. And I think this is because one thing the Bible text says is God was with Joseph. Potiphar knows that God is with Joseph. And even that in itself is crazy to me because he goes into this new situation into Egypt. If you've been to the museum, if you've seen Egyptian stuff, everything in Egypt is about Egyptian gods, Egyptian deities. And Joseph comes in unashamedly. He's like, I serve this God. This is what I do. From day one as a slave, he's open about it. And so when he does start being successful, people are like, well, what's different about this guy? Well, I know he serves his God. And so he's so open and plain with it. I think Potiphar knows, this isn't the type of guy to do that. He cares too much about his God to do what she says he's going to do. But what can Potiphar do? To all outside onlookers, is he going to take the word of some slave he's brought into his house over his wife? It's like his self-esteem is like, no, I've got to do something. Let me put this guy in the dungeon forever. That's problem solved. And it one thing that interests me about this is I do believe that Joseph knew that Potiphar didn't believe his wife, but he put him in prison anyway. And be honest, at this point in the story, this is the point where it's a crossroads. Because a lot of us reach this. We prayed for that job. God gives us the job. It's a testimony. We tell everyone else about how God gives us this job, and then we get fired from the job. Now what are we going to do? Are we like, God, how could you do this? God, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this to me? You bring me up here and then you drop me down low. And it's like, this feels worse than when I was in the pit in the first place. Or does Joseph be like, okay, God's brought me up to this level. I'm now down this level. God must have something else planned. And I think that is, that Proverbs verse, the righteous man falls down 7 times, but he gets back up. I don't only think that's talking about temptation. I also think that's talking about circumstances. Is that, part of being a Christian is God is still my God in the valleys as well as in the mountains. And I think at every valley, there's a temptation there to say, no, I'm getting off the train now. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%.
And I think something else as well, right, is that this is, I think, one of the things he's probably learned from his experience with his brothers, is I think with his brothers, one reason he was naive was he was almost trusting too much in the character of other people and not enough in the character of God. I think that's a lesson that he's learned. So when this happens, when essentially Potiphar and Potiphar's wife let him down, it doesn't devastate him completely because he's not putting his life in the hands of other people anymore. I think he's putting his life in the hands of God. I think that for me is maybe the most valuable lesson he learned from his experience with his brothers is my life is in God's hand, not other people's hands. So if other people let me down, which they will, I'm prepared for that. And I think this is something the world really struggles with, because when the world doesn't have God, they tend to put their confidence in either people or philosophies or isms or political parties or whatever it is, or movements. And when those movements do let them down, as they're invariably going to, that's devastation. That's, I don't know where to turn now. You know what I mean? So I talked a lot. Any thoughts on this going into prison episode? Go ahead, kids.
So for me, it reminds me of back to that time I was made redundant. And funny enough, I think prior to that, I don't think I actually had a favorite Bible verse. I don't know why. That's something that came to mind. But out of that experience, that's when my favorite Bible verse ended up being trust in the Lord with your heart, upon your understanding, in all your ways acknowledge me, shall direct your path. And the reason why that became my favorite is because, I'm pretty sure all of us have come across recruitment consultants. And during that period, so many different consultants came my way. And it even got to a point where it got to like around August, I was still searching for a role. And one consultant said to me, "Oh, Kingsley, I'll be honest with you, August is a dry month. It's not really a time that work really comes through." I thought to myself, I don't think you understand the God that I serve, because even though he brought me in this situation, someone telling me that this month is dry, that's just a challenge to God. Yeah. And lo and behold, I think maybe like a week or so later, I end up getting a job. I thought to myself, where's this recruitment consultant now? They're not saying anything. And it's really interesting because when you really look at, an experience as a Christian, when you look at, an experience as just somebody that just believes in God in general, you realize that, you have the good times, you have the bad times, but it's especially within the bad times that God really works things out. And, it kind of makes me think of, when David talks about the fact that, even though you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, with you, he's still guiding you. And it makes you realize that, I can imagine that, already, because Joseph has gone through all these experiences. I mean, he's been made a slave. I don't think you can get anything worse than that. Of course, now he's in prison, but he's already experienced the worst there is. And like you rightly said, it repeatedly said, the Lord was with him. And one thing I like about the Bible is the fact that it doesn't overtly highlight certain things, but it does things on purpose, so it draws your attention to it. So I remember that you just past Friday night, we were studying the book of Judges, and we noticed the recurring theme for Judges is the fact that the Israelites decided to, basically, forget God and go back to what they were doing. And I like what it does that, because it kind of draws your focus to that focal point to realize that even though Joseph is going through this, the Lord is with him. God sees what he's going through and is still helping him. And it reminds me of, the story of the Israelites, the fact that, God basically gets to the point where he speaks to Moses and says to him, "You know what, my people, I need you to go and deliver them. I understand your situation. I understand that you don't really want to go back to Egypt, but I've decided to place faith in you. I decided to say you are the person that will deliver, my people out of Egypt." And it's so interesting because it really shows you that, during your moments of despair and during your moments of, complete crisis and complete, absolute destruction, etc., that's when, God really works within you. And, I think the best parallel I can give is, of Jesus, where, he gets to the point where, when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane saying, "I don't know if I can do this, I mean, yeah, I said I would do this from the beginning of the time, but, it's a different situation. Now I'm literally sweating droplets of blood. And, even when he gets to the cross, he's saying, "You know what, if it's possible, take this cup from me." And, I can imagine for him, I wouldn't say it's the same situation, but I could compare it to Jesus, where, the whole of his life, he's never known separation from the Father. But when it gets to the point where he's at the cross, that's when he literally feels separation from the Father. He feels separation from the rest of the Godhead. And he's literally just like, I don't know if I can do this. But even the fact that God has to basically kind of look away from what's going on, and he can't really take this on. It just really goes to show, I guess, the great understanding that God is willing to place on us to help us to realize that, you know what, even though we're going through bad times, we will be able to see better days.
Amen. Love that. Thanks, James.
No, definitely Kingsley, man. That's quite powerful, man. It's interesting, man, because I'm not too sure if either of you have been to like a visit prison before. But obviously I used to work in prisons. And one thing that a constant theme that you see with people who come to prison is that they come in and the person they come out, someone completely different, read books and they're doing this. In prison, you've got a lot of time to think. And in the fast-paced world that we live in, especially in the city in London, there's no time to think. It's just you're on the go in it from here to here to here. Whereas in prison, it's just like a boom, and it's just you in four walls. So people often have time to think, and they often have time to change. With that in mind, then what it then shows me is that even though Joseph was, he had autonomy over everything, in regards to Potiphar's, house and his money and all that kind of stuff. This Joseph wasn't the finished product. So much so that God had to say, well, listen, Joseph, man, I need to put you in a position where I can get you to be still, essentially, and I can get you to think, and I can continue to work on you, because even though you're here, bro, man, you're not where I need you to be yet. Despite what it looks like, despite people that he's the guy, he's doing this, he's doing that, and he says Yahweh, amen. Calm down, man, calm down, bro, man. You're not the guy yet, man, and I can't do what I need to do while you're here. So you being here is only a token to show you that I'm with you. But now when I'm going to send you, it might seem like I'm not with you, but you just don't forget where I just brought you from. So therefore, I haven't gone anywhere, but there's still work to be done, bro. And I think, especially in front of our church, or just Christian, period, actually becomes the head of Apple. Ash, God is with you, man. It's like, bro, whoa, calm down, man. Calm down, bro, man. I don't know what God's got. I don't know the plan for your life, bro. Jumping, Ash.
Yeah, no, I love that. And just there's some deep comments we've got to read from the chat, but I think that's the thing is like, just imagine the hit to the pride this would have been potentially for Joseph. Is you're overseer of one of the most powerful men in Egypt's houses, and then suddenly, like, you started as a slave, started from the bottom, now you're here, and now you're back to the bottom. In fact, you're worse than the bottom because now you're still a slave, but you're a prisoner. And I think that's the thing. Like, say I do get to level one day where I'm CEO of Apple, and then I get fired, and then the only job that's available is serving fries and Burger King. Like, am I gonna serve fries like I'm serving fries to God, or am I just gonna stay in my bitterness? And it's mad because I, like, on my worst days, like, even where I am working, they might ask me to do something just for a day that I did 4 years ago before I got to my current role. And it feels like a step down, and you're so tempted to just I'm above this now. I'm not in the same place. Like, why should I be in the same place where I was 4 years ago? And just the rebuke is when you read the story of Joseph and you're like, the way he worked in the prison. In fact, let's bring up that text. So this is the way he worked in the prison. It says, once again, don't miss the text. The Lord was with Joseph, and he showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Now, Clark, you say you know about prisons, right? What would you say about someone who runs a prison, who says to a prisoner, you know what, you run everything?
That's not gonna happen, man.
It's not gonna happen. Or what kind of level of trust? Like, to a slave to run your house is one thing, but to say to a prisoner, why don't you run the prison? Bro, that's a different level. But why does it happen? It's because everything he was given to do in the prison, he did it as if he was working for God. And I think there's a thing that wasn't that human, and that, I'll probably say, that manly part that jumps in to say, I'm above this. How can you give me this role to do or that role to do? It was like, whatever I'm doing, I'm going to do it for God. And I definitely think you're right when you said he had another lesson to learn, even after all got to his house. And I think part of it was, yes, he'd been a slave, but he kind of went from being favored son to slave for a bit to really prized employee. And I think when you're serving prisoners, you're serving people who society doesn't care about. And it's like, in preparation for the job he was going to have, he not only needed to know how to mix it with the high up in society, he needed to know how to provide for those who no one else was looking out for them. And God's given him this training in the most unorthodox way possible, but God's doing something with him in Potiphar's house and in the prison. Let's get to the comments. There's some amazing comments there. So Theo said, so many lessons I'm learning with Joseph. One is you don't need to stay in a situation to prove how strong you are. Amen. You run for your life, even if you have to leave your dignity, your coat behind. And Atenio just said, profound lesson right there about stepping back into roles you had in the past. But I want to finish it. Amari made a comment, and I want to throw this question out actually. Joseph had so much opportunity to become bitter, but he didn't. Not to derail the discussion, but what was the key? Why didn't he fall into the bitterness? I'll throw that out to you guys online, but you as well, Clark and Kingsley. What was it that stopped him being bitter in this situation?
I guess it's because of the fact that, God was still, well, obviously, it says the Lord was with him, and obviously, as we understand it, that essentially means that, I guess looking at it from like a personal standpoint, I see it in the sense that, fortunately, all of us have gone through like various different problems. When I guess you can see the beauty of God starting to picture, that's when we think to ourselves, you know what? Yeah, I mean, the situation is bad right now, but I hope to be able to get out of that. So the experience that I can relate to is when my daughter was born. So when my daughter was born, I almost actually missed her birth because essentially what happened is my wife was induced and we were basically being moved from the birthing room all the way to birth. And it just so happened that it was actually really close to St. Thomas Hospital. All know is Stella Hospital in Boris Johnson. And I myself was in one there. So what actually happened was one of the midwives there, she was a bit inexperienced and she thought she knew better than us in some situations. So she said to my wife, "You're not ready to give birth." My wife was just like, "I'm ready to give birth. What are you talking about?" And it got to a point where, obviously, they induced her and she was almost ready to give birth, but my wife made sure that I was in the room before it happened. And what transpired in the process of me literally getting our luggage back to the place where I was going to give birth was crazy because this same midwife actually ended up preventing me from trying to get to the door saying, "Oh, ask another nurse." Wait, what are you doing? There's no reason to do this. But I guess the big thing I'm trying to bring out of all these different stories is that, when you are, looking at different situations, you think to yourself, when you're looking at situations the heat of, you think to yourself, okay, you know what? This is not really something that's worth it. I don't really see any great outcome coming out of this. You have to oversee things. So a good experience I can give in the Bible is, we know when David, Bathsheba and had a son, was told that, your son is going to die. Like that, as a father, that would hurt me. Obviously, circumstances he had the child was quite bad, but, to be told your son is going to die, he's literally just looking at his son, thinking to himself, I know that this is not going to be something that's going to last for long. But despite that situation, God still blessed him, the wisest person ever lived in Solomon. And it just shows us that, even though God will bring us through bad times, he will say, you know what, going through this unfortunate season right now, but despite you going through that season, just know that I'm actually starting to work on something in the background. And that thing going to work in the background is going to have so much more magnitude than what you're going through now.
And I like, you kind of started with saying, but God was still with him. And the thing is, if you looked at circumstances, you would say God was not with him. But this is something that we really, really need to get, is your circumstances do not dictate whether God is with you or not. In fact, more like, unless you hear from God otherwise, assume that God is with you. If God has said he's with you in the past, assume that God's still with you, whatever the circumstances are saying. And I love stories like Joseph because they prove that, our wealth, our power, our prestige has nothing to do with whether God's close to us or not. You know what I mean? Or is not the indicator of God's closeness to it. I see the time, so I'm just going to try and get to the last point. We're definitely going to need this after hours tonight because there's so much still to go through. But I won't read through this whole text, but just to kind of recap what happens next is that you got Joseph in the prison. He's doing his thing. He's caring for these prisoners. He's looking after their needs. And then one day, two new prisoners come in, the butler and the baker, the royal butler and baker. And Joseph's caring for them like he cares for every prisoner. And then one night, God sends them both a dream. And the dream basically means different things for them. They both have dreams that indicate in 3 days, they're going to be taken out of the prison. The baker's dream is that he's going to be taken out and hung. and killed, hanged and killed, and the butler's dreams that he's going to be taken out and actually being given his freedom at the will of the Pharaoh. And this must have been a very tough conversation for Joseph, but he interprets the dream. And one thing that's interesting is he's very clear that, when they say they've had a dream, he says, God can interpret your dreams. He's going to do it through me, but he doesn't take the credit for himself. But it's interesting because after he's interpreted the dreams, you can see that actually the dreams come true. So this is Genesis 40, verse 20 to 41, verse 1. And it said, now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast of all his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And I put that last verse in there just to kind of stress a point, is that when he interpreted the dream for the butler, Joseph said to the butler, can you please remember me, when you go back to Pharaoh, because it's going to be in 3 days' time. You're going to go back to Pharaoh, and can you remember me? And hopefully, Joseph's probably thinking, God sent these people. He sent their dreams. He sent me to interpret their dreams. This is my ticket out of here. And 3 days they go back just as God had predicted. And can you imagine what the next couple of days felt like for Joseph? He's like, it's my ticket out. It's my ticket out. It's not happened. It's not happened. It's not happened. And it is only 2 years later when God sends Pharaoh the dream that the butler actually remembers. And I don't know, like I struggle if I say to someone, can you call me back? When you call your friend, I won't mention any names. You guys probably know who I'm talking about now. But when you mention any names, but when you call someone and they send you the text, I can't talk now, I'll call you right back. And it's urgent. You're like, okay, please call me back because we need to talk. And they don't call you back by the end of the day. That burns, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine 2 years of waiting for your freedom though? But once again, Joseph keeps doing what he's doing. Welcome, Clive. How you doing, bro? So Clive's jumped on in the last few minutes. Thank you for being here. Time difference is mad in America, but I know you wanted to be on this one, so I appreciate you joining up. But yeah, we're just talking about Joseph in prison. And yeah, what do you think in that situation where, like, I don't know, do you think this was part of God's plan that the people kept him waiting? Was it just God's timing? Or do you think this was a human letdown that God eventually made right?
I think there's a possibility it could have been part of God's plan, because obviously we don't know. This is more just me speculating in terms of what's going on. But I think to relate it from an experience of my own, and also so the experience we're probably all quite familiar with was when Lazarus died. Rightly so, his siblings come up to Jesus and start asking, we know who you are, we know what you're capable of. Why did you let it get to a point where 4 days have passed and now you're coming to, say you're going to come and resurrect him? And what's so interesting is the simple words Jesus says to him. He said, Lazarus is asleep. I'm going to wake him up. Don't worry, he's asleep. And it kind of reminds me of experience I had. So a good friend of mine, he's actually a pastor now. Many years after he got baptized, he said to me that on the day that we were going to get baptized, basically, if we all know where baptism works, it's usually register order. So I sent him to Cressy. So actually speaking, he was supposed to go before me. But something that was unbeknownst to me at that time when we got baptized was that he kind of did a little switcheroo. He was getting a bit nervous. So I go into the pool. I'm a bit confused, thinking, what's going on? I thought he's supposed to get baptized first. Then many years ago, many years later, he recounts the whole story to me and says, Kingsley, I'll be honest with you. What happened that day is I got a bit scared. I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this baptism thing. But the moment that I saw you get baptized, I thought to myself, if Kingsley could do this, I can definitely do this. And sometimes I feel like God will literally allow, I guess you could say, put a seed out there, allow it to germinate. And then when it's ready to actually be manifested, that's when allow it to come to pass. And maybe, I guess something happened in that 2 year period where God thought, you know what, if Joseph received what I'm trying to give him, he wouldn't really truly appreciate it. And I think the fact that, even though it is a bad situation, he told him, remember me. And, it's almost as if, he just sat on the information and thought, you know what, I don't have to worry about it. Maybe at this time, Joseph maybe needed. But the irony of it is that, well, I'm kind of going a bit forward, but we know that the time that God called him was perfect, because that's exactly when Pharaoh needed him to be able to interpret it. it literally was, in my understanding anyway, God orchestrating the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely. Any thoughts on that, Clive or Clark? Actually, even before you go, there's a couple of comments from the chat. Maybe we can bring this in, but Phyllis Sandy, as Joseph's relationship with God grew closer, he became better instead of bitter from the situations he went through. And I think that's definitely something, like, he's been through enough with God now to know that as disappointing as it must have been, he's still trusting God with this. And also, Atieno said about asking to be remembered by the butler, to do good without expecting back. I think that's the point, is Joseph would have interpreted the dreams or whatever without any kind of favors. He definitely wasn't just looking for a reciprocal thing when he did this, when he cared for the prisoners, but it was something that he'd asked for on top of it, but I think he would have done it anyway. But with that all in mind, do we think it was God's timing that kept him in there for another 2 years?
That's the thing, man. It almost comes across as if Joseph is trying to bust himself.
Yeah.
You know, like, if I'm trying to get a job, say for instance, I go for an interview, I'm like, actually, man, speak to a manager for me, innit? I've got jobs based on the fact that, not that I was good for the role, but that I know the manager in it, or I know the person, I know the CEO, and so therefore I know I'm gonna get it, despite no matter how I do it in my interview. Like, I'm gonna get the job, and you see what I'm saying? And it almost comes across as if Joseph is trying to navigate his own destiny from this point forward. So we say, you know what, I need to get out here. I want to get out here. Speak to that guy when you go out there, and just let him know that I'm down here. Innit? Maybe he's forgot, you know. And then once he realizes I'm here, then he'll free me, essentially. Whereas once again, man, and I think we've seen this premise all throughout Scripture as well, man, is that the Bible says, man, that man has plans, but God has the final say, man, depending on what version you use or read, bro. And that's just the reality, man. Joseph is like, yo, do this. God is like, bro, man, you still got another 2 years in here, man. So just get comfortable, big man. Yeah, and I think I think the safest place to be is wherever God is, bro. And wherever God is in your life, man, if Jesus is in the ship, then be in the ship, bro. If he's on the water, in the waves, then be there, bro. But wherever he is, man, that's the safest place to be, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to join. Come in on it.
Yeah, I think Joseph is one of my favorite characters, all-time characters, and one of my all-time favorite quotes that Ellen White writes is actually this one, and I'm going to read it. And I think I've said it on here before, but it says, he found a work to do even in the prison. God was preparing him in the school of affliction for greater usefulness, and he did not refuse the needful discipline. In prison, witnessing the results of oppression and tyranny and the effects of crime, he learned lessons of justice, sympathy, and mercy that prepared him to exercise power with wisdom and compassion. So for me, it's like, you know, God can put you in a specific situation, and it may be hard. And obviously he's in prison, and I can't imagine that even the conditions of prisons back then are even close to what they are now in Western society. But what I love about this is God is saying that he was being trained. And obviously he came out and he became second in command in Egypt and basically saved the nation. If you think down the road of what he actually did, he is the reason why Egypt grew so big, because all the surrounding nations came to Egypt for food. And he was the one that interpreted the dream. So for me, it's like, yeah, you may be going through the toughest and darkest time possible, but have you actually considered that God is training you for something even better? And when you flip the script and actually start thinking about that, you're like, hold on a second. Yeah, life is tough right now. Yeah, I ain't got money to pay my bills. Yeah, this, and this, and this, and this. But actually, God is training me for something down the line. He maybe have some great work for me to do in the future. And when your perception on your mind actually changes to that, you actually start to see God working in completely different ways.
I love that. And we see it repeated. We see it in like Moses' life. What good is me, ex-prince, being a shepherd for 40 years in the wilderness going to do? This is part of the training. And I think it's so key to think the job he's doing. Like, how many of us wish some of our politicians that kind of mouth off about these people are a problem, that people are a problem? You're like, you know what? Just go to a refugee camp, go to a prison, live among those people for a while and get some compassion, get some empathy before you're making these policies. And God needed to put Joseph in that position And like you said, he wasn't just saving them from a famine. The wealth that got brought into Egypt through that period literally set Egypt up for the dynasties that we know Egypt is famous for today.
Right.
But I think one thing as well is just looking at God's timing. Like, it was 2 years later that was the perfect timing for Joseph to come out of the prison, because then he was predicting events that were just about to take place. And what he said was, you need someone to be in charge during these times. So literally, Joseph needed to come out when he needed to come out. At the time, it must have been so hard, so complex to understand. And the levels of disappointment of thinking you were about to be released and then not being released must have been so tough. But we're going to look at a quote as when we get towards the end. I think we've only got maybe another 5 minutes because we will have to wrap up. But when we get towards the end, there is a quote Joseph says at the end of at the end of Jacob's life, after Jacob passed away. He says to his brothers, what you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And I think he could say that to almost everyone else he meets in his life. Potiphar, you meant to put me in the dungeon for evil. Potiphar's wife, you meant to do this for evil, but God had a lesson for it. And even butler and baker, butler anyway, you forgot about me and it was a bad thing, but God did something with that timing as well. Sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to kind of look at, I don't know what you guys covered at the beginning, I missed it unfortunately, but you have to look at like Joseph's character, like early on when he was saying the things to his brothers, for example, and they hated him. You have to know when somebody hates you, right? You have to like get some kind of inclination that something's not right here. Like it says his brothers actually hated him, so much so that, some of them wanted to kill him, some of them wanted to sell him, if you're going down the process. So if you think about his actual character, he needed that training. He needed that like humbling almost to be the person that he was going to be. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Same with Moses. He probably lived a much more privileged life, and he needed that training in order to be who God wanted him to be later on down the line. So I think it's important to just see those opportunities, see those difficult situations that you're going through as simply just training for what God has you to do in the future. Or character development, literally character development as well, because that's exactly what he needed, character development.
Yeah, and I think, one thing that hit me definitely today is we're talking to men. I think there is that thing about your pride or your dignity as a man sometimes being tied to what you do, what you work, what your financial situation is in. A lot of people, they'll go through hard times, they lose a job, they have to move in with family or whatever it is. And we really sometimes see that as devastating, where God's like, no, this is the training, part. It's very hard to live through. But I think a lot of it is you look back and you realize, no, God was doing something at this point in my life. If I hadn't had to go through this period, I wouldn't have been ready for the next period in my life. So yeah, that's huge. Thank you for that. I'm seeing the time. I hate to say it, because like I said, we could talk about Joseph forever, but we are going to have to get towards the end. There's maybe one more thing I want to share before we wrap up about Joseph, though. And this is just this idea of legacy. Almost all of us say Joseph is one of our favorite stories in the Bible, and we talked about some of the reasons why, some of his character and stuff. But I think one of my other favorite things about it is it ties in to so many other stories in the Bible. People learn from Joseph's experience. And for me, it's almost, this is the way to read the Bible. It's not just, it's academic, but the Bible isn't a checklist. It's not a textbook. It is a storybook, and it tells us these stories because God knows that we're going to go through some similar stories and situations. And that's why we do this ministry in the first place. But I did want to just read a couple of verses just to show this kind of connection. I don't know, Clark, maybe you can read the first one from Genesis 41, and then Clive, if you can read Daniel 2, 29-30.
Sure. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace.
Amen. Thank you. And then, if you go to Daniel, Clive.
As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, the secret has not been revealed to me, because I have more wisdom than anyone living. But for our sakes, we make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your hearts.
Amen. I love that. And I think for me, it's this realization when I read that, if you read Joseph's story and then Daniel's story or a few other people's stories in the Bible, you start to realize, like the same way I say Joseph's one of my favorite characters, I have no doubt that Daniel would have been like, Joseph's one of my favorite characters in the Bible. And it just makes me think, like, we think of the stuff that happened to them as like, that's old school, that's biblical stuff, that's what God does with the Bible. But you realize, like, they're no different to us. Like, we have no idea, wherever we are in life, if our story could be like the next Daniel story or the next David story or the next Joseph story. The point is reading the word and seeing their stories come to life in this way and seeing these lessons and then pulling it out for ourselves, because we'll be in situations maybe in the workplace, maybe, you know, whatever spheres of influence we're in, where we will have the chance to be like a Joseph in that situation, or just to be like a typical person. But yeah, that kind of legacy point is huge to me of what we kind of take away from this story. Any last thoughts on that just before we wrap up today?
I was just going to say that it reminds me of the text in 1 Corinthians 10:11, which talks about now all these things happen to them as examples, written for admonition upon whom the end of the ages have come. Obviously, we've studied this book for, probably since we were born, and we hear all these great stories and everything. We think to ourselves, how can I be a Daniel in a world like this? How can I be a Joseph in a world like this? What's so powerful about all these stories like that? They were literally just human beings, but the main difference between them and at that time is just the fact that they trusted in God. And I think that's really actually take hold of. When you have trust in God, you can look at a situation, a glass half full, and see it as a glass full. Think to yourself, you know what? Even though this situation is not really working well, he was able to overcome it. If you look at another situation, those were able to do this, and I guess through those experiences, as well as even our own experiences, get to a point where it doesn't matter what situation will come our way. We'll literally say, you know what, whatever may come my way, I know that God is on my side.
I love that. Any other thoughts, guys?
I think his legacy. I mean, I've heard it many times that he's one of people's favorite characters, like you just mentioned. But I think his legacy goes even beyond the Bible. Like if we've been to Egypt before, actually, together, and you go to places like Joseph's Canal, and where he because of what he knew, he basically channeled so much water to different places to grow crops and things like that, and the storage units that they have all over the country for grain and food like that. Like he literally saved a nation as well as the people around him. So I think his legacy goes beyond some of the big biblical things that we're pulling out. It actually goes on a practical level as well. Like because he was so faithful, because he was so trusting, he literally saved so many people's lives. And then obviously grew the children of Israel in Egypt as well, because the baseline was from his family and all the people that came over. So he almost saved a nation and created a nation at the same time of people. So it goes beyond just the biblical things that we've pulled out, but also on a practical level too.
Yeah, I love it. And it's like you said, it's beyond the Bible. Like, I'll be honest, I was reading not too long ago Nelson Mandela's biography, and you're like, yo, goes from the prison to the palace, and those same principles, even when someone's not as overtly spiritual, it's like the principles we see in Joseph's life are our principles for living as a man, and understanding that, going from our prisons to our palaces is possible with God. It's whether we are prepared for that, whether we act in a way that we're prepared for that, or we let doubt and self-pity kind of creep in and ruin that for us.
I think that's important because, like, you never hear him complain. Like, you never hear him being like, oh, I'm in prison. Like, oh, God, this is your fault or whatever. He doesn't complain. He kind of just takes it on the chin and moves on. And it's not like he stops his ministry. He continues ministering to people within the prison. So it's like when things aren't even going away, I think our attitude towards things as well, like not complaining and just getting on with it and just trusting God is vitally important too.
All right, guys, I'm gonna have to call it there. I'm afraid we got back to our old habits of running till 1:45. But thank you so much for jumping on. Yeah, Clive with the time difference, Kingsley with the last minute jumping on. But it's Joseph, man. This is one that I know we wanted to be part of. So I really appreciate that, and Clark as well. Just before we wrap up, as always, I just want to share, there's going to be a lot to say. We're going to jump onto the after hours kind of straight after this. So those are the details. Please make a note of them. We'll drop them in the chat at the end as well. But yeah, do join us for that. We're literally going to be on Zoom, I think about 10 to. So please join us. And also next week. So it's an interesting one next week. This is kind of our last individual Mighty Man study, but it's not the end of the season because we've got something kind of different next week. We're transitioning straight after the Mighty Men series into Mighty Women Foundations. And so next week we've got a crossover episode. We're going to have both panels kind of joining together, and we have a joint study on the 14th. So that one's going to be a very interesting one. This whole series has been about family, and this is really about a family, almost of what not to do, but a really, really deep story of family, looking at Lot's family, Lot himself, Lot's wives and Lot's daughters, and we'll have the Mighty Men and Mighty Women on the joint panel on that one. So please plan to be at that one. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's also going to be really challenging. So yeah, we really want to have you there. So yeah, that's what's in store. But we just want to say thank you so much for sticking with us tonight. We love the responses from you guys, and please do join us for the after hours. Could I just ask Clive, could you just pray for us to wrap up this study today?
Sure, let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for the study that we've been able to have and the things that I've been able to pull out. I pray, Lord, we may take some of these things and run with them, really. Just take example from how Joseph went through affliction and how he stayed faithful. Help us to be faithful in the little so that we may be faithful in much. I pray that you may be with us as we move into the next portion now. We thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen, amen. Thank you so much, guys. So yeah, we'll see you on the other side in just about 2 or 3 minutes. And yeah, blessings, guys. See you soon.